Let's talk about the long tail cast on. It's my favorite all-round cast on. It's quick and it creates a really, really lovely edge. And it has a few hidden depths you might not know about, some variations which are really useful. I always start with a slip knot. Some people don't, but I find it holds its shape a little bit better, it holds its place a little bit better, and it's a more even edge. So I've got a slip knot on my right hand needle, and I'm using my index finger to hold it down. If you don't, it will go flying. The hand position here is 3/4 of the battle. Here's how I do it. Grab the two yarns and tug them down to create some tension, and use your thumb and forefinger to separate the two strands as if you were throwing the curtains open, like they're coming in from the same direction. So I grab, I separate the strands, and then I'm going to roll my palm up. You see why I need to hold on to the slip knot here? It would have slid off already. Roll my palm up. So I'm going to reposition this a couple of times so you can see it. The needle is sitting between the thumb and the forefinger, and the two strands on either side are set up for me. So you swing the needle over the far strand of the thumb, scoop it up from underneath to create a loop. I've created a loop on my thumb, and I'm going to swing over and grab the near finger strand as if to knit and pull it through the thumb loop. And then I get rid of the thumb loop here. And when you're first learning this, it's not a bad idea to reposition your hand every time, but once you get good at it, I tend to just keep it as one fluid motion. I'll show you how. Hands in position here, swoop over the top of and grab it from underneath to create a loop on your thumb, and then swing over, grab the near finger strand, you're coming over top of that, bring it through the thumb loop, and then take your thumb out of the thumb loop. And you see you can actually just sort of kick it with your thumb to straighten it out and to smooth it out. Again, once more, over, so it's the same motion, over. And if you remember a song from the 1980s, Malcolm McLaren and Buffalo Gals, he sang Buffalo Gals Go round the outside. I date myself here, round the outside. And that was actually the way that I remembered this, because that's when I learned it. So you're going around the outside, and you're creating a loop on your thumb and pulling it through. Okay. You're using, you see, we can move quite smoothly and quite quickly once you get the hang of it. You're using both ends of the yarn. You've got a tail and you're attached to the working yarn. There are opinions about which direction, which yarn you should have on which side, whether you need the working yarn over your thumb or over your finger. It's all to do with how long a tail you have, because it uses a long tail, right? So you got to make sure you have enough of this to create sufficient stitches. There are two ways to estimate. I'm going to keep doing this as I talk just so you can see the motion. There are two ways to estimate the length of the tail. The accurate method is if you wrap the yarn 10 times around your needle, that gives you about 10 stitches worth of length. My method is much more cavalier. You'll never run short if you leave yourself about 1 inch per stitch. And the reason that I like an inaccurate method is if you get the two in the wrong place, and I'll explain what I mean, you're not going to run out. Because it turns out you use the two strands up at different rates, and if you're too accurate, use up more of the one than the other, and if you're too accurate, you risk running out, and that's something I do not enjoy doing. So I always generously overestimate my tail. 1 inch per stitch for all but the bulkiest of yarns. For sock yarn, actually about 1/2 inch, 1 centimeter per stitch is perfectly fine. And that way you'll never run out. The other discussion about the long tail cast on is how to make the edge loose. We describe this one as stretchy, and it can be done properly, but you need to make sure that you're careful when you do it. So let's talk about looseness and stretchiness, and I want to show you something important. You wouldn't normally do this, I don't think, but if I'm casting on with 2 different colors here, it illustrates an important point. Okay. The amount of stretch in the edge of your cast on is controlled by how much yarn is in that lower edge, how much blue yarn is there. So the way that we add more blue yarn when you're casting on is you leave some breathing room between the stitches. I'm still snugging them up to the needle. I'm not leaving them sloppy, but the stitches have some space between them, a full finger's worth of space effectively, and that adds more blue in the base. Some people tell you that if you cast on over 2 needles held together, you get a stretchier edge. Let me demonstrate. First of all, I find this one, look, I'm making a mess of this. It's tricky with these giant jumbo needles anyway. I find this trickier. Okay. But if I cast on a few stitches with my ridiculously large needles here, 2 of them, okay, do you see that what I've done is I've added more orange, but I have not added more blue. So this casting on over 2 needles held together thing, what that does is that makes the stitches of the first row larger, but it does not add any extra blue, so it's simply not necessary. To make a stretchy edge, just leave some breathing room between the stitches. Space them out. There's actually another way to execute this cast on. Some people call it knitting your thumb. You create a backwards loop on your thumb and then bring the yarn around to knit that stitch. Okay. What results is exactly the same edge. There is no difference in these. It's just how you hold the yarn. I prefer the slingshot method for a couple of reasons. I prefer it because I find it easier to get the stitches even. It's also more inclusive of how you hold your yarn. So as a knitting teacher, this method works for someone who's used to holding their yarn in their left hand as well as in their right hand. Whereas this method really only works if you're a yarn in right hand kind of knitter. But they both do the same thing. And if you know this one, there is no reason to change. Okay, they achieve the same thing. It's like you're knitting the stitch, and indeed that's what you're doing. You're knitting that first loop. So what results here is stitches set up for knit. If you're working flat back and forth in rows, then that gives you an interesting opportunity to establish your edge. Here what I used was the long tail cast on, and I've got 2 different edges. I did the long tail cast on here and immediately knitted. See, if I turn around the wrong side, do you see how those look like purl bumps? Well, indeed they are purl bumps. If I were to knit on top of that, knit my first row, you get a fairly prominent edge there with those purl bumps. I like how it looks, but it may not be what you're aiming for. So what I did here was, if you've got your long tail cast on, I purled the first row. Let me flip this over again. So what you get is an edge that is much more in keeping with your stocking stitch, with your stockinette stitch. So I look at this, and if I'm working flat, what I've got is effectively my stockinette wrong side. I've got my purl stitches facing. So for a smooth edge, purl that first row.